Hi all. Today we're talking about racism, visible and invisible identities, and unpaid care work. I'm going to start with racism in thinking about the implicit associations that people have in their head, the stereotypes that they've learned about different groups of people. Something to think about when we're talking about visible identities is that what matters is the way that people perceive you. It's not actually the identity that you hold, but the way that people read you that matters. And so if you have an identity that is read specifically in one way, if you are very visibly a person of color, people will interact with you based on the ideas that they have about this group. The prejudice and the preconceived notions affect the way that they read you and the way that they interact with you. It's not something that can be taken off. And these prejudices are usually not conscious. So if we are encouraged to think about people of color as dangerous and criminal, it's not surprising that folks would get nervous and jumpy when they're around people of color, because that's a message that we've been fed. We've all been fed this message. What we can start to do is start to recognize the messages that we've learned and actively try to pull them out. When we look at not just the small interpersonal interactions, but also the way that racism shows up in structures, we want to think about all the different benefits that we've assigned to whiteness. So for example, practices like redlining, in which a city was divided up and pretty much zoned into black and white. And folks of color were only allowed to live in one neighborhood that was artificially kept economically depressed. So bank loans wouldn't go to this area. When we talk about the way that voter suppression has been historically racist, and still is, even the most recent voting suppression laws have to do with folks of color and low-income folks. So we start to move from just interpersonal interactions to also noticing the way that structures reinforce this dynamic. When we think about the non-visible identities, these are identities that you might hold that people cannot read on you quickly. This is important because the dynamic changes. When we're thinking about visible identities, that can never not be a part of an interaction. And that constancy is really draining. You can never know if the person who just treated you badly at the bank or at the store was doing it based on their racism, or if it was just having to do with what happened in their day and they were having a cranky day. That constancy is really draining because you can never be off. You can never have a rest from it. That's always part of the way that you are perceived in the world. On the other hand, the non-visible identities, we can talk about passing privilege. And so if people can read you as part of the dominant group, not part of the oppressed group, they can give you benefits that can help you out throughout your day. They can support you in different ways. The downside to this is that information management becomes crucial. Who knows? What do they know? When do I tell them? How do I hide this? Do I hide this? This in itself is draining in a different way, having to keep stories straight and figure out who knows what they know about you. It's also problematic because you won't know who your people are. I can't walk into a room and know who's queer because it's a non-visible identity. So I don't know who can back me up in case of need. I don't even know who to reach out to. And so the non-visible identities sometimes do things like having visible markers. So I wear my pretty rainbow ring. That makes me very happy every day. And it's a big accomplishment for me to be at a place where I can have a marker of queerness directly on my body. So the dynamics are different, and we want to kind of think of the ways that these patterns might be similar. So for example, since racism and skin tone is a visible identity, what could it have in common with sexism, which is often a visible identity as well? We can usually read who is presenting as a woman in a space, and so as we perceive them, we interact with them. And so could it be that the stereotypes about women being dumb or bad at math be playing into this interaction? When we're talking about non-visible identities, we might talk, for example, about psychiatric diagnoses as a non-visible identity, and information management being a really big part of how you show up in the world. Who knows? What do they know? Who is around me who also shares this identity?